I broke my number, one rule of intimacy with a man who uses a wheelchair. And my best friend mistakenly thought I had a thing for disabled people, obviously. I don't need anyone here to see my regular account. Plus, I'm in the US and English is my first language. So, any mistakes are because I suck at typing on my phone. So, give me a break. I don't have all day to listen to this lot. My number, one rule since high school has been no sex before the third date. I recently broke that rule with a guy who uses a wheelchair. Now, my childhood best friend is upset, disgusted, and thinks I have some sort of strange preference. I'm a 28-year-old woman who has always had a clear stance on relationships and intimacy. My childhood best friend, Jess, who is also 28, has known me since we were kids. Over the years, we've shared countless secrets and stuck together through thick and thin. To put it simply, I don't think I'm a prude. But I've always been uncomfortable with casual intimacy. It's just not my thing, and never has been. Jess is well aware of my views on this subject. She watched me navigate high school crushes, college flings, and the awkward stages of young adulthood. Understanding my stance, Jess has often teased me about it in a light-hearted way. Her jabs were never meant to hurt, they were just part of our dynamic, a way of highlighting how different we were in some respects. While I spent most of my 20s focused on getting my degree and starting my career, Jess has been in a stable, long-term relationship for the past 3 years. Her boyfriend, whom she met shortly after she moved out of state, seems like a great guy. They've built a life together, and while I'm happy for them, it's also a stark reminder of how different our lives have become. Living in different states has made it difficult for Jess and me to maintain the closeness we once had. We used to spend almost every weekend together, but now our interactions are mostly limited to occasional phone calls and social media updates. Despite the physical distance, I've always felt that our bond was unbreakable. But recently, I've started to feel the strain of our separate lives. While Jess has been busy with her relationship and new experiences in another state, I've been navigating the often lonely path of being single. My focus was on building my career and achieving my personal goals, which has been fulfilling but isolating at times. About a month ago, I went on a first date with a guy I had been messaging online for a while. We exchanged messages, shared a few laughs, and I really thought that things were going in a positive direction. Eventually, we decided to meet in person. I was cautiously optimistic, but once we were face to face, things felt off. There was an inexplicable, strange vibe that I just couldn't shake. The conversation felt forced, his jokes fell flat, and there was an underlying tension that made me feel uncomfortable. After about an hour of strained small talk and awkward silences, I decided to cut the date short. I made a polite apology and left feeling a little disappointed but relieved to be out of the situation. On my way home, I decided I needed to relax and shake off the awkwardness of the evening. I remembered a local pub that I used to frequent, a cozy place where I could just relax and watch people. It was a Friday night, so I expected it to be busy, but I figured it was worth a try. When I arrived, the place was indeed packed. The bar area was filled with groups of friends and couples enjoying their night, and there wasn't a single seat available. Determined not to let the night end on a sour note, I grabbed a drink and started looking for a place to sit. Most of the restaurant side of the pub was taken up by a lively birthday party, complete with balloons, laughter, and the occasional off-key singing. Amidst the chaos, I noticed a small table off to the side. There was only one seat, and it was open. A man was sitting there, buried in a book. He seemed completely engrossed in his reading, oblivious to the commotion around him. I hesitated for a moment, considering my options. I'm a social person by nature, and the idea of sitting alone didn't appeal to me. Taking a deep breath, I decided to go for it. What's the worst that could happen? He might say no, and I'd have to move on. It didn't seem like a big deal. I approached the table with a friendly smile and asked if I could sit there for a while, promising him that he didn't even have to talk to me if he didn't want to. To my surprise, he said yes. He looked up from his book with an enthusiastic smile and said, "Sure." As I sat down, I got a better look at him up close. He was strikingly handsome, the kind of guy who was effortlessly attractive. I felt a twinge of nerves but quickly pushed it aside. I sipped my drink in silence, feeling a little conscious but also intrigued by my unexpected company. A few minutes later, he looked up from his book and said, "I don't mind talking if you want to." His voice was warm and inviting, and I couldn't help but feel a little relieved. So, we started chatting. It turned out that his name was Mike, and he was 29. He had just finished his master's degree in, field not mentioned, and was living on his own for the first time. He explained that he often came to the pub after work because he lived nearby and wasn't used to the quiet of his new place after growing up in a large family with half a dozen siblings. We talked for a good 2 hours, delving deeply into various topics and finding common ground on almost everything from our views on dating to our favorite hobbies and tastes. It felt like we had a near, total eclipse of the minds. Our conversation was effortless and engaging, a rare connection that seemed to spark from the beginning. Mike shared that he had basically given up on dating, which I found surprising given how well we were getting along. I couldn't help but blurt out, "I don't know why you gave up dating. This is the closest thing I've had to a good date in forever." It was my way of expressing my interest, albeit indirectly. He gave me a kind of strange look that I couldn't quite decipher, and then he said, "I have to go to the bathroom, but when I come back, I'll ask you out for real." It seemed a little strange, but I nodded, curious about what would happen next. When he started to leave, everything clicked. Instead of getting up to walk away, he rolled back in his wheelchair. And then it hit me that he was disabled. He had wanted to give me a chance to back out without making things awkward. The realization made my heart swell. I was struck by how thoughtful this guy could be. When he returned and saw that I was still there, his face broke into a wide, delighted smile. It was the kind of smile that could light up a room, and I felt a rush of warmth. I was so eager to reassure him that I almost stumbled over my words. I said something along the lines of, "I'm free all weekend. What are you doing?" With that in mind, his grin got even wider, and we started planning our next date. Another hour later, we were making plans for Saturday. Our conversation had flowed so smoothly, and the connection between us was undeniable. At some point, Mike opened up about his condition. He explained that he had a neuromuscular disorder. He mentioned the name of the disorder, but it was a little too technical for me to remember. To be precise, my degree is not in STEM. Basically, his legs work, but the signals from his brain are misinterpreted, causing a lack of balance and coordination, which prevents him from walking or standing. As we talked, the atmosphere in the pub began to change. The younger, rowdier crowd began to take over, and the noise level increased significantly. It became harder to hear each other over the music and chatter, and the intimate atmosphere of our conversation was being drowned out. Noticing this, Mike leaned over and asked, "Would you like to come back to my place for coffee and continue our conversation?" His tone was casual, but there was an underlying sincerity that made me feel completely at ease. The idea of spending more time with him was incredibly appealing, especially away from the growing chaos of the pub. I agreed, and we made our way to his place. As you've probably guessed by now, our coffee and conversation didn't happen until the next morning, and I have absolutely no regrets. We've been dating ever since, and although it's still early days, I really feel like he might be the one to build a future with. Yesterday afternoon, my friend Jess was in town. We decided to meet for coffee to catch up. It had been a while since we had seen each other, and I was excited to share everything that had been going on in my life, especially my blossoming relationship. Mike and I picked a cozy little cafe, the kind of place we used to frequent together, and settled in with our drinks. As we began to chat, I couldn't help but gush about Mike. I told Jess how we had found our amazing connection and how happy I had been since we started dating. I expected her to share in my excitement, but as I told the story, I noticed that her demeanor changed. She became quiet, and her expression shifted from one of interest to one of caution. She grew tense when I got to the part about breaking my long-standing rule of no sex before the third date. Jess's reaction was unexpected. I don't remember her exact words, but she basically accused me of having a fetish for disabled people. She implied that the only reason I was with Mike was because he used a wheelchair, not because of who he is as a person or the effort he puts into our relationship. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. It was as if she was saying, "You're only happy because he's in a wheelchair, not because he's actually good for you or tries hard." Jess had always known me as someone who valued deep, genuine connections, and her insinuation felt like a betrayal. She went on to say that I had changed as a person. Before I could even process what she was saying, she got up and left without a word, ending 15 years of friendship in an instant. And I had never seen her like that. I sat there for a few moments, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her reaction was completely unexpected and hurtful. It wasn't just about her disapproval of my relationship with Mike, it felt like a personal attack on my character and values. I had always thought that Jess understood and supported me, and her sudden outburst left me feeling isolated and misunderstood. As I replayed the conversation in my head, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, hurt by her words, confused by her reaction, and worried about what this meant for our friendship. Jess's reaction seemed to come out of nowhere, and I couldn't understand why she would think so negatively about my relationship with Mike. It was clear that something deeper was bothering her, but at the time, I just didn't know what it was. All I knew was that my best friend had left me without even saying goodbye. After 15 years of friendship, I'd never seen her like this. This is my first update ever, yay. So, I have an update on Jess, and I finally understand what happened. Also, I have a not safe for work but funny story about Mike. Because that guy is just the best, y'all. After a restless night of tossing and turning, replaying the conversation with Jess in my head, I knew I had to address the situation. I couldn't let 15 years of friendship end without at least trying to understand what had caused her to lash out so harshly. So, I finally worked up the courage to message her yesterday. I said, "I'm still hurt by what you said, but after 15 years of friendship, I would never forgive myself if I didn't at least ask why you snapped at me like that." To my surprise, Jess responded almost immediately. Her answer was filled with a sense of regret and urgency that I hadn't anticipated. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any of it," she wrote. "Can we make up over lunch?" Despite the lingering hurt I felt, I agreed, albeit cautiously. We arranged to meet at a cafe we both adored, a place that held numerous fond memories from our shared past. The next day, I arrived a bit early. As I waited for Jess to show up, nerves rattled within me. I replayed our last conversation in my mind, mentally bracing myself for whatever she might say when she finally walked through the door. When she did, she looked just as worried as I felt. We exchanged awkward smiles and a brief hug before sitting down. Jess was the first to speak, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm really sorry about the other day," she began. "I was completely out of line, and I need to explain what was going on with me." Let's pause for a moment. It turns out that those of you who said she was jealous and struggling with something, especially the person who suggested there might be issues in her relationship, you hit the nail on the head. Jess revealed that she was in town because she was looking for a job. She'd had to move back in with her parents for a while, a temporary yet necessary move since her relationship had ended. As she began to open up about the breakup, the weight of her recent struggles became evident. The relationship that had once seemed so stable had slowly deteriorated, due to a multitude of small problems that had gradually piled up. But the biggest issue, the one that finally ended the relationship, was their intimate life. Jess explained that her boyfriend had never been particularly attentive or skilled in that regard. Recently, things had gotten significantly worse. She described how he made no effort to ensure she enjoyed their intimate moments. What had once been occasional disappointment had morphed into a constant source of frustration and sadness. Instead of feeling close and connected, Jess often felt neglected and unsatisfied. This neglect extended beyond their physical relationship and into their emotional connection as well. Despite her growing dissatisfaction, Jess tried to approach the problem constructively. She spoke to her boyfriend with honesty, expressing her feelings and suggesting ways they could improve their intimate life. She hoped that open communication would bridge the gap and bring them closer together. However, their attempts to improve things met with resistance and hostility from her boyfriend. He defensively dismissed her suggestions and feelings, telling her that it was emasculating to receive intimate advice from a woman. This response not only hurt Jess but also left her feeling hopeless. How could they work through their problems if he wasn't even willing to listen? The situation continued to escalate. Every time Jess tried to talk about her concerns, her boyfriend's defensiveness grew. He began to get angry when she wasn't in the mood, completely ignoring the fact that his lack of effort was the reason for her reluctance. Instead of understanding and working together to find a solution, he chose to blame her for the growing distance between them. The last straw came during a heated argument about their intimate life. Her boyfriend suggested something that left her feeling deeply hurt and disrespected. He had always had a thing for Asian women, a preference Jess was aware of but had never addressed. In a misguided attempt to spice things up, he asked her to dress up in a kimono and pretend to be Asian. This suggestion, steeped in racist fetishism, was not only offensive but also a clear indication of how little he understood or respected her. Unable to take it anymore, Jess kept all of this pent up inside. She had been hoping to talk to me and finally unload, but I missed every hint that she had something important to discuss because I was so caught up in talking about Mike. She was sitting there, trying to get a word in, but I was too wrapped up in my own excitement. It felt like I was twisting the knife by bragging about how great our time together had been, going on and on about how amazing Mike was, how connected we felt, and how perfect everything seemed. She was trying to be supportive, but as I kept talking, I could see her patience wearing thin. I didn't understand at the time that my joy was a painful reminder of what she was missing in her own life. And then she snapped. Somewhere between what I was saying and what she was about to say, a line was crossed, and she blurted out something incredibly stupid, accusing me of having a fetish for disabled people. It was such a bizarre and hurtful thing to say, completely out of the blue. I was stunned, unable to comprehend why she would say such a thing. She didn't even wait for my reaction, she just got up and left without saying goodbye. After 15 years of friendship, she walked out on me, leaving me sitting there, confused and hurt. It wasn't until later that I began to piece things together. She was embarrassed and ashamed of her outburst, but also irrationally angry at me. Not because of anything I'd done intentionally, but because my happiness felt like a slap in the face. Jess had hoped to talk about her breakup and finally unload the weight she'd been carrying. Instead, she felt overshadowed by my excitement and lashed out in a moment of frustration and pain. It was a perfect storm of miscommunication and unmet needs, leaving us both feeling hurt and misunderstood. One thing to know about Jess is that she's a terrible liar. Back in high school, we jokingly called ourselves the co-founders of the Foot and Mouth Society. Recognizing her sincerity, I told her that I forgave her and apologized for not realizing she had something important to say. She reassured me that I was being ridiculously nice and had nothing to apologize for. So, I think we'll be okay for now. We decided it's best for her and Mike to meet later because I don't want to make things more awkward, and she agrees with that. But she's really happy for me, so hopefully, this will just be a funny story that we can laugh about someday. Now, about how Mike almost killed me. Last night, we were talking about the Reddit post, and he got this weird look on his face, an expression that I'm starting to recognize. I knew he was about to say something that would either make me laugh uncontrollably or leave me completely speechless. He leaned forward with a mischievous grin and said, "How do we know you don't have a fetish if we haven't at least tried it in the chair I'm sitting in?" I stared at him in disbelief and couldn't help but laugh. "Are you serious, LOL?" I asked, half expecting him to say he was joking. But he wasn't. Mike nodded seriously and said he'd never tried it before. As he said that, he added that he'd never felt so comfortable with a partner before. My heart melted a little, and I was kind of excited by the idea. Still grinning, he said, "Why not try it?" That's how we ended up in this ridiculous but adorable situation. His wheelchair has what is essentially a parking brake, which turns out to be broken. Getting it fixed is apparently a hassle and quite expensive, so he hasn't made it a priority. So, here's what happened. We were trying to create the movement of the ocean, in a rather intimate way, but every time we'd push the chair, it would roll backwards. It was like this weird, awkward dance. Instead of moving forward, we were inching our way across the floor, both of us laughing so hard at the absurdity of it all. And the more we laughed, the harder it was to keep our balance and focus. At one point, Mike just stopped and said, through his laughter, "Maybe we need those wooden block things they use to keep little airplanes from rolling away, you know, like in Indiana Jones." I completely lost it. I was laughing so hard I could barely breathe, tears were streaming down my face, and he was giggling right along with me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of giggling and struggling, I managed to calm down a bit. I took a few deep breaths and tried to regain my composure. Looking at him with the straightest face he could muster, Mike said, "This is really uncomfortable. If I had asthma, I would have died right there." I thought I had pulled a rib, making that horrible wheezing sound as I tried to catch my breath. Mike was laughing too. He rubbed my back and apologized, saying he couldn't resist. So, yeah, confirmed, no fetish here. Just a couple of idiots in love with terrible comedic timing. But I have no regrets. This man is the best thing that has ever happened to me, and moments like this make me love him even more. Another update, I met Mike's family, and it was quite an experience, or at least it felt like one at the time for a girl who grew up in a small, dysfunctional family. First of all, there's something people don't really think about when they're dating a guy who's always sitting: his height. It's one of those things that just doesn't cross your mind. I knew Mike was taller than me because when we cuddle on the couch, he's taller. But I never really realized how tall he was until this weekend. Friday night after work, we drove up, actually south and west, but in my brain, it's always up. We were in his vehicle, which is completely modified to be driven with his hands. He's a really good driver, which was reassuring. More green flags, a sea of them. We chatted and laughed during the drive, but I was getting a little nervous because this was the first time I was meeting his family. Finally, we got to the house, and it was huge. Not a mansion, but a sprawling one-story rancher. Real estate was wild back then. I was already feeling a bit small standing next to this huge house. Then we got inside, and the next thing I knew, his mother came out to greet us. I'm no slouch at 5 feet 7 inches, but she towered over me. She had this warm, welcoming smile that made me feel a bit better, but it was hard to ignore just how tall she was. She was practically a giant. We moved into the living room, and I met his father, who was the only small one in the family. Then his youngest sister came in, holding her 1-year-old daughter. She was also incredibly tall. It was like walking into a land of friendly giants. It was late, so after a quick introduction and some light conversation, Mike showed me to his old room where we were staying. It was cute and full of nostalgic teenage memorabilia. As we were getting ready for bed, I casually asked, "Hey, I don't know how this works, but how tall are you, Mike?" He shrugged and said, "I don't know, like a little over 6 feet. Been a while since I checked." "Just over 6 feet?" I asked, a bit surprised. He grinned and said, "Sort of." The next morning, I got to meet the rest of Mike's family. Let me tell you, it was like being introduced to the Nordic gods. They're actually Irish, but they're all blonde and tall, so the image fits better. The only one of reasonable height, and even taller than me, was his oldest sister. It was kind of hilarious, honestly. They were also loud, not in a screaming way, but their voices filled the room. Their laughter echoed, and their energy was undeniable. Mike was very different around them, but in the cutest way possible. He beamed all the time, his happiness radiated from him. You could tell how much he loved being home with his family. One of his brothers greeted him by putting him in a headlock and giving him a noogie. Mike, of course, elbowed him in the side, and they both ended up laughing. It was all so natural and full of love. Then his mom hit one of his brothers with a rolled-up magazine for putting his feet on the table, and that started another round of laughter. The whole scene was a little intimidating, but in the happiest way I can imagine. I'll admit, at first, I felt a little overwhelmed and withdrawn. There was a lot of energy to take in, and I wasn't used to such a rambunctious family. But Mike kept checking in with me, giving me reassuring smiles and gentle touches to ensure I was okay. His family, noticing my initial discomfort, went out of their way to include me in their conversations and jokes, which helped a great deal. After a while, I started to get into the spirit of things. Their warmth and genuine kindness were impossible to resist. We had breakfast together, and it was like a scene from a movie, with everyone talking over one another, passing plates, and sharing stories. The atmosphere was chaotic, yet in the most welcoming way. As the day wore on, I witnessed more of this loving chaos. Mike's family was playing a game of basketball in their backyard, and I watched in awe as they moved with a level of coordination and playfulness that only comes from years of sibling interaction. Speaking of sibling rivalry and bonding, I'd forgotten to mention that Mike has a special sports wheelchair that he uses specifically for, you guessed it, sports. He and his siblings love to play basketball together, and he's really good at it. Not only does he have an impressive throwing arm, but he's also incredibly fast, which is one of the many wonderful aspects of this guy I'm in love with. He'll happily and intentionally run over someone's toes, aiming for it on purpose. This makes his siblings have a hilarious reflex of pulling their feet back just in time, and it's absolutely hysterical to watch. Watching Mike in that environment made me appreciate him even more. He seemed different here, more relaxed and alive, yet still the same wonderful person I'd fallen in love with. His family's love and acceptance were a significant part of who he was, and to be welcomed into that was an incredible feeling. So, it was this crazy day filled with loud people playing, having a great time, nieces and nephews running around, and just a lot of noise. My ears are still ringing from it all. The food was catered beforehand because his mom had 7 children. "All I do on Mother's Day is make margaritas," she said. "They have a pool." It was still a little chilly, but the pool is heated, so we all actually got to swim, which was a lot of fun. I got to show off that I'm athletic, too. I can do a backflip off a diving board. They said I was a real catch, or at least they pretended to be impressed. We stayed up late, drinking and complaining about how it was too cloudy to see the aurora borealis. The sky had promised a spectacular light show, but the clouds decided to ruin the party. Despite our disappointment, we made the best of it and talked and laughed well into the night. By the time I crawled into bed, I was already bracing myself for the inevitable hangover that hit me like a freight train on Sunday morning. It was one of the worst I'd had in a long time, so we slept in a little late, trying to recover from the excesses of the previous night. When we finally dragged ourselves out of bed, we joined Mike's family for the barbecue part of the weekend. Mike's dad can barbecue like a pro, and he's fast, too. He had food coming off the grill in a flash, perfectly cooked and smelling divine. I was amazed at how efficient he was. I asked Mike about it, and he laughed, saying, "There were 7 of us to feed." If you've ever seen a nest of baby birds, you know I've had practice. Watching his dad in action, I could easily imagine a younger version of him, surrounded by hungry kids, barbecuing up a storm to feed everyone. I don't have much experience with babies, but during the barbecue, I got to hold Mike's youngest niece. She's the one who lives at home with his sister until her husband gets back from deployment. She was such a sweet little bundle of energy, and it was heartwarming to have her in my arms. As I held her, Mike and I began to talk lightly about having children in the future. I confessed to him that I'd never really thought about having kids, but seeing how happy and close-knit his family is made me consider it. I told him, if they grew up in a happy home like yours, and not the way I grew up, I'm pretty sure I'd be open to having them with you someday. I added, but later, I need you all to myself for a while. Mike's face lit up, and he seemed really, really happy about it. His joy was contagious, and I felt all warm and fuzzy inside. I know it's silly, but I couldn't help but feel happy, too. Honestly, I wouldn't trade those moments for anything. On Sunday night, before we left, Mike's mom pulled me into a big, warm hug. She told me she'd never seen her son so happy. She was overjoyed and thanked me for taking such good care of her baby. It was one of those moments that felt both heartwarming and a little overwhelming at the same time. She asked if we were coming back for the 4th of July or if we had plans with my family. I tried to play it cool, but my answer was a bit awkward. "No, we'll be here if you don't mind. I don't see my family much." I think she picked up on the underlying story there because she just hugged me tighter, as if she could draw the Viking spirit out of me, I swear. She told me she couldn't wait to see me again as she hugged me. I felt this incredible warmth and acceptance. It was like she understood without me having to explain anything. Her hug was so tight and comforting, and it made me feel like I was truly a part of her family. It was one of those rare moments when you feel completely seen and appreciated for who you are. I couldn't stop thinking about the weekend of meeting Mike's family. What an eye-opening experience it was. They were loud, loving, and a little overwhelming at times, but they were also incredibly supportive and welcoming. It was clear how much they cared for each other. To be included in this circle of love was very special. As we drove through the dark, quiet streets, Mike reached over and held my hand. We didn't have much to say, but the connection between us was palpable. The weekend had brought us closer, and I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together. My ears are still ringing from all the noise and chaos, but it was an absolute blast, and I can't wait to see them again in July for sure. Mike is the man I'm going to marry. I literally can't think of a single reason why I would ever let him get away. Thanks for reading. I hope you all had a great weekend, and for those of you who got to see the aurora borealis, I'm happy for you, but you suck, lol. What do you think of this story? Please share your comments below. Thanks for listening.